The Arctic is a place that does not forgive. Its white expanse stretches to every horizon, a cathedral of ice built by winds that have never known the warmth of human breath. Temperatures here can drop to 60 below, cold so absolute that steel becomes brittle as glass, and a man's last exhale crystallizes into 1,000 tiny diamonds that scatter on the wind, carrying the ghost of his final moment into the indifferent void. It was here, in the summer of 2024, that a team of glaciologists from the Norwegian Polar Institute made a discovery that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. They were mapping ice movement on the remote island of Spitsbergen, using ground-penetrating radar to study the layers of accumulation that stretched back millennia. The equipment had been acting strangely for days, intermittent signals, unexplained echoes, readings that suggested something solid buried deep within the ancient ice. The team leader, Dr. Alara Voss, dismissed it as equipment malfunction, a common nuisance in extreme conditions. But the signals persisted, growing stronger as they moved further into the uninhabited eastern glaciers. On the 7th day, the radar revealed something that stopped them cold. A massive, man-made structure, perfectly preserved, lying 200 feet beneath the surface. The shape was unmistakable. An aircraft. A 4-engine propeller plane of a type that had not flown since the middle of the 20th century. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. A plane buried in Arctic ice so deep that it must have been there for decades, perhaps longer. The coordinates were recorded, the location marked, and within weeks, an international expedition was organized to excavate the site and uncover the mystery. The team that assembled at the remote camp was a collection of the best minds in polar archaeology, aviation history, and forensic science. They were led by Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose career had been defined by a single, driving obsession: the recovery of lost history from the world's most inaccessible places. His eyes, pale blue and perpetually tired, held the look of someone who had seen too many empty graves, too many stories that would never be told. The excavation took 3 weeks. They drilled, they cut, they extracted core samples that revealed the plane's gradual entombment over decades. The ice was not a single catastrophic freeze, but a slow accumulation, layer upon layer of winter snow that never melted, compressing into a crystalline coffin that preserved every detail with terrifying precision. When they finally reached the fuselage, the sight took their breath away. The plane was a Douglas DC for a workhorse of post-war aviation, but its livery was unfamiliar. No markings of any known airline, no registration numbers, just a sleek silver skin that gleamed in the artificial lights as if it had been parked there yesterday. The windows were frosted over, opaque with centuries of ice, but behind them, shapes were visible. Shadows, forms. The first breach was made through the forward cargo hatch. Dr. Thorne went in alone, his breath pluming in the frigid air that rushed out to meet him, air that had been sealed for more than 70 years. His headlamp cut a path through the darkness, illuminating a narrow corridor lined with stacked crates. The crates were marked with Cyrillic letters, supplies, equipment, nothing unusual. He moved deeper into the plane, towards the passenger cabin. The door was jammed. He had to force it with a crowbar, the metal screeching against the frozen hinges. When it finally gave way, the beam of his lamp fell upon a scene that would be seared into his memory until the day he died. They were still in their seats, dozens of them. Men, women, children, all perfectly preserved, their skin waxy and pale in the dim light, their eyes closed as if in peaceful sleep. They wore clothing from the late 1940s, the kind of practical, durable garments favored by those who traveled in the years after the war. A woman in a floral dress clutched a small handbag on her lap. A man in a fedora sat beside her, his hand resting on her arm in a gesture of comfort that had frozen into eternity. A child, perhaps 8 years old, sat alone near the window, a small stuffed bear tucked under his arm. But it was not their stillness that made Dr. Thorne's blood run cold. It was their faces. They were not peaceful, they were not sleeping. Their expressions were frozen in a moment of such profound, absolute terror that it seemed to radiate from them like a physical force. Mouths open in silent screams. Eyes wide, though closed, the muscles around them contorted in agony. Hands clenched into fists, knuckles white even in death. These people had not simply died, they had witnessed something that had torn through them in their final moments, leaving behind only these masks of horror. Dr. Thorne stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He called for his team, his voice cracking with a fear he could not explain. They came, and together, they documented the scene with the cold precision of science, trying to ignore the weight of those frozen faces staring at them from the darkness. The cockpit was empty. The pilot's seats were vacant, the controls untouched, as if the crew had simply vanished mid-flight. On the co-pilot's seat lay a leather-bound logbook, its pages brittle with age but still legible. Dr. Thorne took it back to the camp, where it was carefully thawed and opened under controlled conditions. The entries began normally. Flight 7, departure from Murmansk, Soviet Union, destination, unknown. The date was October 12, 1948. The crew consisted of 5 men, all experienced polar pilots. The passengers were listed only by number 47 souls, no names. The cargo was described in cryptic terms, special project materials classified. The first 3 days of the flight were unremarkable. Routine checks, weather observations, the mundane details of long-distance aviation. Then, on the 4th day, the tone changed. October 16, 1948. Something wrong with the compass, fluctuating wildly. Navigator says we're off course, but can't determine how far. Radio silence from base. Feels like we're being watched. The entries grew more erratic as the days passed. The handwriting, once neat and professional, became a scrawl of desperation. October 18th. The passengers are restless. Some claim to have seen lights outside the windows, nothing on radar. Engineer says engines are running hot, no cause found. October 20th. 3 days without sun, no idea where we are. Fuel low. Everyone is praying. I don't believe in God, but I'm praying too. The final entry was dated October 23rd. It was written in a hand that barely resembled the pilot's. The letters large and trembling, as if scrawled in utter darkness. They're here, inside. Don't know how. Don't know what they want. Passengers are screaming. I can hear them through the door. Something moving in the cargo hold, something that shouldn't be. If anyone finds this, run. Don't open. Don't let them out. They've been waiting. They'll always be waiting. The entry ended mid-sentence, trailing off into a long, jagged line that might have been made by a pen, dragged across the page by a hand that had suddenly, violently, stopped moving. The discovery of the logbook changed everything. What had been a mystery of aviation history became something else entirely. A horror story with no ending, a sealed tomb that might contain more than just frozen bodies. The team debated for days. Some wanted to abandon the site, to seal the plane back in the ice and let its secrets die with it. Others, driven by the same curiosity that had brought them to this place, argued that they had to know. They had to open the cargo hold. Dr. Thorne made the decision. He was a scientist. He believed in truth, in the power of knowledge to overcome fear. He ordered the cargo hatch opened. The hold was larger than they expected, occupying the entire belly of the plane. It was packed with crates, dozens of them, all marked with the same cryptic symbols and warnings in Russian. Extreme caution, do not open, authorized personnel only. In the center of the hold, a single crate sat apart from the others, larger than the rest. Its wooden surface, scarred and blackened, as if by some intense heat. They opened it with crowbars, the wood groaning in protest. Inside, nestled in a bed of lead-lined padding, was a metal cylinder. It was about 3 feet long, a foot in diameter, its surface etched with symbols that none of them recognized. It was warm to the touch, despite the freezing temperatures all around. Dr. Thorne leaned closer, his face inches from the cylinder, and then he heard it. A sound. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Scratching, coming from inside the cylinder. He stumbled back, his heart pounding. The others heard it too, their faces pale in the dim light. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. And then a voice, not a human voice, but something that approximated human speech. A dry, rasping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Open. Let us out. We've been waiting. So long. So cold. Let us out. The team fled. They scrambled up the ladder, through the fuselage, out into the blinding white of the Arctic day. Behind them, the scratching continued, growing louder, more frantic, until it became a cacophony of sound that seemed to shake the very ice. They sealed the plane behind them, but it was too late. The cylinder was open now, not physically, but metaphysically. Something had been released. Something that had been waiting in the dark, in the cold, for 70 years. That night, the camp was attacked. The first victim was a young geologist named Sven, a cheerful man from Stockholm, who had spent his career studying the polar ice. He was found the next morning, lying in the snow, 100 meters from his tent. His body was intact, untouched by any animal, but his face. His face was frozen in an expression of such absolute terror that those who found him could not look at him for more than a few seconds. His eyes were wide open, staring at something only he could see. His mouth was stretched in a silent scream that had frozen on his lips. Their footprints led towards the buried plane, then stopped, as if they had been lifted into the air by some invisible force. Panic set in. The team wanted to leave, to fly out on the helicopters that had brought them here, to abandon this place and never return. But the helicopters wouldn't start. The radios wouldn't transmit. They were cut off, isolated, alone on a frozen continent with something that was hunting them. Dr. Thorne gathered the survivors in the main tent, faces lit by the flickering glow of a single kerosene lamp. There were 7 of them now, down from the original 15. He told them what he suspected, that the cylinder in the cargo hold had contained something ancient, something that had been trapped for millennia, perhaps longer. Something that the Soviets had found and tried to transport, something that had brought down the plane and waited in the ice for someone to free it. "It's not a creature," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not in any way we understand. It's a presence, a consciousness. It feeds on fear, on terror. That's why the passengers, they didn't die from the cold. They died from what they saw, what they felt. It's been feeding on them for 70 years, keeping them preserved, keeping them fresh." The scratching sound returned that night, louder than before, coming from everywhere at once. From the walls of the tents, from beneath the snow, from inside their own heads. The whispers followed, the same words, over and over. "Let us out. We've been waiting so long, so cold. Let us out." One by one, the survivors succumbed. They would walk out into the darkness, drawn by the whispers, their eyes glassy and vacant, their mouths moving in silent conversation with something only they could see. Dr. Thorne tried to stop them, tried to tie them down, but it was useless. The presence was stronger than rope, stronger than will, stronger than anything human. On the 5th night, only Dr. Thorne remained. He sat in the main tent, alone, listening to the scratching that now seemed to come from inside his own skull. He knew he couldn't fight it. He knew he couldn't escape, but he could leave a record. He could tell the world what they had found. He wrote for hours, his pen scratching across the paper in the dim light, documenting everything: the discovery, the logbook, the cylinder, the deaths. He wrote until his hand cramped and his eyes burned with exhaustion. And when he was done, he sealed the pages in a waterproof container and buried them in the snow beneath the tent, marking the spot with a small pile of stones. Then he walked out into the darkness. The last entry in his journal, found months later by a search team that came to investigate the team's disappearance, was written in a hand that barely resembled his own. The letters were large and trembling, the same desperate scrawl as the pilot's final words. "They're here, inside. Don't know how. Don't know what they want. If anyone finds this, run. Don't open the plane. Don't let them out. They've been waiting. They'll always be waiting. Now. So will I." The search team found the camp abandoned. The tents collapsed under fresh snow, the equipment scattered as if in panic. They found the buried journal and read its terrible account. They found the plane, still entombed in its frozen prison. Its windows still frosted over, the shadows of its passengers still visible behind the ice. No one has gone back. The site has been declared off-limits by every government with any claim to the region. The coordinates are classified, the records sealed, the story suppressed. The official explanation is that the team perished in a sudden storm, a tragic but mundane end to a routine scientific expedition. But those who know the truth, those few who have read Dr. Thorne's final words, understand that the storm was not of wind and snow. It was something older, something colder, something that had been waiting in the Arctic ice for a very long time. It is still waiting, still scratching, still whispering, "Let us out. We've been waiting so long, so cold. Let us out." Somewhere in the frozen north, buried beneath 200 feet of ancient ice, a plane sits in perfect preservation. Its passengers still scream their silent screams. Its cargo hold still contains a cylinder that should never have been opened. And its cockpit still holds a logbook with a final entry that ends in a jagged line, drawn by a hand that had suddenly, violently, stopped moving. The ice remembers. The ice preserves. And in its frozen heart, something waits for the next warm hand to come knocking.